Following the infamous slap heard around the world at this year's Academy Awards, you know, the one where Will Smith slapped the ash off Chris Rock's kneecaps, ever since then, it just seems like everybody from every which way is coming out of the woodworks to try and find dirt on Will Smith's character. That's us. We're everybody. Well, it looks like we found exactly what we were looking for. Comedian and actor Paul Rodriguez recently came out and exposed Will Smith for his behind-the-scenes abuse and bullying on the set of the 2001 biopic Ali. Racial slurs, unsolicited threats, and all-around odd behavior was said to be prevalent while filming, and knowing what we know now, we can't say that we're too surprised. Deeming the whole situation as evil, Paul wants you to know what's really up with Willy Will. Unfortunately, this isn't the first time he'd recount his story, which has us wondering exactly how serious the situation had been. Rodriguez has been in Hollywood since the early 80s, appearing in shows like Pablo, Trial and Error, and has been the host of the Latin reality show Mis Videos Locos. He's been able to work alongside Clint Eastwood, feature in films such as A Cinderella Story, perform voiceovers in animated series like Dora the Explorer, King of the Hill, Beverly Hills Chihuahua, and has a featuring voice role in his most recent film, Clifford the Big Red Dog. Recognized as one of the greatest stand-ups of all time by Comedy Central, he's been awarded with a Humanitarian of the Year award by the city of Fresno for his work in water conservation. Touching on a bit more of Paul's background, he's performed for several comic relief specials, performing live from the Sandpoint Penn State Prison, and was also recognized for being highly influential for aiding in California's water bond measures. Now, I say all of that in hopes of giving you a bit more insight on what Paul Rodriguez is all about and why his recount of his experience on the Ali biopic set is highly questionable, but not on his end. 2001 sports drama biopic Ali is a film starring Will Smith based on the world championship boxer and activist Muhammad Ali, basing its plot on Ali's life over the span of 10 years from approximately 1964 to 1978, capturing his heavyweight title from Sonny Liston, his transition to Islam, critique of the Vietnam War, his cancellation, his return, his comeback, and political beliefs. Playing the role of Muhammad's cornerback, Fruity Pacheco, curious filmgoers may have noticed that Paul Rodriguez's role in the overall film had been cut short. So short, in fact, he might as well not have been in the film at all. But what you probably didn't know was the behind-the-scenes chaos that resulted in Fruity Pacheco going from Muhammad's cornerback to somewhat of an extra. Following the infamous Oscar slap, Paul had expressed that the reason for the slashing of his on-screen time was due to being bullied by the Will Smith. Matter of fact, things got so out of hand that he described Will's assault against Chris at the Oscars as one physical slap, but the verbal slaps Paul endured all them years ago by Will had been a daily occurrence. The movie was meant to be a huge stepping stone for Paul and his character, but ended up becoming the complete opposite. Upon arrival to set, Will was initially kind to everyone, including Paul, but once the two crossed paths a second time, something had flipped. Will began to ignore Paul, giving him the cold shoulder before outright uttering cruel remarks to him unprovoked. "You're a long way from anybody that likes you," Will would say, and if that doesn't sound terrible enough, he'd inspire the other actors on set to follow in his footsteps, further ostracizing Paul overall, treating him like the help instead of a main cast member, all in hopes of staying on Will's good side. The treatment toward Paul made him nearly throw in the towel and quit filming until one castmate, John Voight, yes, Angelina Jolie's daddy, convinced him to toughen it out by explaining Will's usage of method acting. Being a leading character in a major film isn't an easy task, and the pressure could have possibly been applied a little too firmly on Will's back. Possibly. John may not have been too far off, since this wouldn't be the first time that we'd hear about Will's method acting, which as of recent he no longer practices. A calming convo between John and Paul ceased Paul's nerves, and he'd end up toughening it out while attempting to avoid Will as much as he could when the two didn't have to interact on set or film in the same scenes. Despite Paul's attempts to play it cool, calm, and friendly, Will just was not having it. Describing the entire incident as sort of like Jekyll and Hyde, Will made it his mission to place his angst and anger onto Mr. Rodriguez, all whilst being his kind, silly Will from Philly self to everybody else. Now, for those wondering who the heck Jekyll and Hyde are, well, they're characters from a Gothic novella series following a London legal practitioner who investigates a series of odd occurrences between old friends, Dr. Henry Jekyll, and a murderous criminal who goes by the name Edward Hyde, who's also characterized as an evil creature without compassion or remorse. The character Hyde is an example of someone with a psychiatric disorder, more commonly known as split personality disorder. What makes the situation even more out of the ordinary was the fact that this hadn't been the first time Will and Paul had worked on a film together. In 1993, they were both casted in a movie Made in America, and the two seemed to get along just fine. Given their friendly interaction on the set of that film, one can only imagine Paul's complete and utter confusion when he had stepped onto the Ali set, most likely thinking he was going to have a good old funky time with past associates, only to be met with hostility by the film's protagonist. Attempting to be the bigger person and bury the hatchet, Paul took it upon himself to approach Will and talk it out. This unfortunately wouldn't go as planned. Will allegedly brushed him off, looked him dead in the eyes, and with chest, told his fellow co-star to shut up and just stand there. Fighting words activated. The sudden switch in Will's attitude toward Paul may not have been so sudden after all. Before filming began, the real and very much controversial Ferdy Pacheco had stepped onto the set completely wasted and helped himself into Will's trailer. It was apparent that he was irritatingly irritated, and it's been said that the reason for the drunken outburst was due to his part in the movie not being as big as he'd wanted. On top of that, he was upset that Paul was chosen to depict him in the movie instead of the actor Ferdy would have chosen, Andy Garcia. Words were exchanged and things escalated to the point where the N-word was being recklessly tossed around like a hot potato. Police were eventually alerted to escort Ferdy out, and after everything was all said and done, Will had emerged from out of his trailer, and this is where Paul said he'd noticed a change in Will's behavior. Upon the film's release in 2001, Paul was absolutely heartbroken as well as embarrassed when he noticed his lines in the film were chopped and screwed more than a DJ screw mix. After production had added the final touches and the film was finalized, Paul looked like a simple extra in the movie instead of a supporting character. Let Paul tell it, he believes that this was all Will's doing. That or a suggestion ordered by Will himself. To prepare himself for the role, Paul had taken voice lessons and took extra measures in order to get the role of Pacheco just right. All of that just to not only be ostracized, but humiliated and have his scenes drastically reduced in such a huge blockbuster. Ruminating on the possibilities of the reduced role possibly ruining his career in Hollywood, he'd often think about Hollywood execs looking at it, thinking Paul Rodriguez is so bad that his scenes had to be cut from the movie. Alleged usage of steroids by Will had also been brought up into question, allegedly, and Paul seems to think that that could have possibly played a part in Will's behavior that day. Well, maybe it's time we look back at the whole Will and dark-skinned Aunt Viv situation? A case of hurt people hurting people? Someone took their anger out on Will, therefore he took his anger out on someone else. That someone else being Paul Rodriguez, who unfortunately became the target of Will's inner turmoil. Is this the end of Will's good guy Hollywood image? Let us know your thoughts and opinions down below in the comments section, and stay tuned for more true celebrity stories.